The air in the Peruvian capital of Lima was thick with the heavy scent of the coming rains and the bustling anticipation of Christmas Eve as the year 1971 began to draw to a close. But for 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke, this day was not meant for celebration or festivity. Instead, it was a journey home, a transition from the humid chaos of the city back to the quiet, familiar life she knew at her parents' research station deep within the Amazon rainforest. She sat nestled between her mother Maria and father Hans, feeling a rare sense of peace and happiness as she looked out at the cloudy sky. Little did she know that this routine flight on the small Lockheed Electra turboprop operated by the airline LANSA would soon become the defining moment of her life, turning a simple return trip into a harrowing tale of survival against the impossible odds of nature and fate. Juliane was a bright and observant young woman, having grown up in the jungle. She possessed a unique understanding of the wild that most city dwellers could never comprehend. Her parents were respected zoologists, and their life in the rainforest had taught her to be calm, rational, and deeply respectful of the natural world. Yet as the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the gray December sky, nothing could have prepared her for the catastrophe that was silently waiting in the storm clouds ahead. The flight started normally enough, with the low hum of the engines vibrating through the cabin and the passengers settling into their seats. But as they approached the dense tropical jungle landscape, the weather began to turn ominous. Dark clouds gathered like a bruised ceiling, and the rain started to hammer against the metal skin of the aircraft with increasing intensity. The turbulence grew violent, tossing the small plane like a leaf in a gale, causing drinks to spill and passengers to grip their armrests in fear. Juliane watched her mother for reassurance, seeing the fear in her eyes, but also a steely resolve as they flew straight into the heart of a monstrous thunderstorm. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted from anxiety to terror as the plane shook violently. Then suddenly, without warning, a blinding flash of white light illuminated the interior. A bolt of lightning had struck the wing directly, tearing through the fuel tank and igniting a fire that consumed the aircraft in seconds. The sound was deafening, a roar of tearing metal and rushing wind as the plane began its fatal descent. Gravity took hold, and the world spun out of control. Juliane felt a sudden calm, a strange detachment, as if she were watching from outside her body as the plane broke apart around her. The pressure change sucked the air from her lungs, and the next thing she knew, she was falling alone through the rainy darkness, strapped into her seat, surrounded by the debris of the shattered aircraft. The laws of physics said she should not survive a fall from 10,000 feet. The impact should have been instant and absolute. But as she plummeted toward the thick green canopy of the Amazon, she was cushioned by the very trees that usually seemed so forbidding. The branches broke her fall layer by layer, slowing her descent until she slammed into the muddy forest floor with a force that knocked the consciousness out of her body. The rain continued to fall, incessantly washing over the broken girl lying amidst the wreckage. Her body was broken, her collarbone fractured, her arm deeply cut, and one eye swollen shut from the pressure of the fall. But incredibly, impossibly, she was alive. When she finally woke up, the silence of the jungle was deafening. There was no engine roar, no cries of other passengers, just the endless drone of insects and the distant call of tropical birds. She was alone in the vastness of the Amazon, with nothing but the clothes on her back, a broken pair of glasses, and a single sandal. The pain was excruciating, but the shock was even worse. As she looked around, she saw pieces of the plane scattered like toys, and the realization of her isolation began to sink in. She called out for her mother, but there was no answer. Only the heavy, humid air pressing against her skin. The first night was a nightmare of pain and fear. She huddled under a seat cushion, trying to shield herself from the relentless rain, shivering in the cold darkness. But as the morning light filtered through the dense canopy, something shifted inside Juliane. The panic began to recede, replaced by the training and resilience her parents had instilled in her. She remembered her father's lessons about survival. She remembered that if you are lost in the jungle, you must find water and follow it downstream, because water always leads to people. With a determination that defied her injuries, she began to move slowly and painfully through the underbrush. Her senses were heightened to a point of acute awareness. She noticed the small details, the tracks of animals, the types of plants, the direction of the water flow. She found a small creek and began to follow it, wading through the water to protect her feet from the thorns and biting ants that covered the forest floor. The days blurred into a cycle of agony and endurance. She had no food, only the water she drank from the stream. She had no proper shelter from the sudden downpours that chilled her to the bone. The wound on her arm became infected and maggots began to appear. A sight that would have horrified most people, but Juliane knew she had to get them out. She remembered that her father had told her oil could be used to draw them out, but she had no oil, so she did the only thing she could. She squeezed the wound, pushing the writhing larvae out of her flesh, enduring the pain with a stoic silence that would become the hallmark of her journey. The jungle was beautiful, but it was also a graveyard. She came across other passengers from the flight lying broken in the foliage, some still strapped to their seats. It was a sight that could have broken her spirit, seeing the reality of death so close. Yet she forced herself to keep walking, forced herself to look away and focus on the path ahead. On the 4th day after the crash, she found a small packet of sweets, a Christmas gift that had fallen from the plane. It was a tiny miracle, a moment of grace in the midst of hell, and she ate them slowly, savoring the sugar that gave her a fleeting burst of energy. As the days passed, her body grew weaker. Her ribs hurt with every breath, and the infection in her arm throbbed with a persistent heat. But her mind remained sharp. She refused to give in to despair. She refused to accept that this green hell would be her tomb. She thought of her father waiting for her. She thought of her life, the books she wanted to read, the future she wanted to have. And these thoughts became her fuel, pushing her forward when her body wanted to collapse. On the 9th day after the crash, the jungle began to change. She saw signs of human activity. A cleared patch of forest. A boat docked on the riverbank. Her heart leaped with a fragile hope. She pushed through the last barrier of vegetation and found herself on the shore of a larger river. There she saw a small hut, a shelter for workers, and nearby a canoe with an outboard motor. Her ordeal was finally over. She collapsed onto the floor of the hut, exhausted and broken but alive. Later that day, the lumbermen who owned the shelter returned. They were shocked to find a ghostly figure, a young girl covered in mud and bruises, barely able to speak. They tended to her wounds, gave her food and water, and the next day they took her down the river to a small town where she was eventually flown to a hospital. When she finally reunited with her father, the weight of her survival crashed down on them both. Her mother had not survived the crash, a fact that Juliane had suspected, but seeing her father's grief made it real. She had lost her mother, but she had survived. She had walked out of the Amazon rainforest alone against all odds. Her story became known as the miracle of the Amazon, a testament to the sheer force of the human will to live. But for Juliane, it was not a story of heroism. It was a story of necessity. She did what she had to do. She drew upon the knowledge she had been given and faced the darkness with a quiet courage that saved her life. She returned to Germany to continue her studies, following in her parents' footsteps to become a biologist, dedicating her life to understanding the very forest that had tried to kill her and the animals that lived within it. Years later, she would return to Peru, to the site of the crash, not to relive the trauma, but to find closure, to understand the timeline of those final moments, and to pay respect to the memory of her mother and the others who lost their lives that day. The experience marked her forever, changing her relationship with death and life. She no longer feared the inevitable, understanding that survival is often a matter of chance, but how we face that survival is a matter of choice. The girl who fell from the sky remained humble about her ordeal, attributing her survival to luck and her upbringing, but to the world, she remains a symbol of resilience. A young woman who faced the abyss and refused to let it consume her, walking through the depths of the Amazon with a broken body and an unbroken spirit, proving that even when the world falls apart beneath us, there is always a path forward if we have the courage to take the first step.